Hi, everyone. My name is Newman, as you've probably heard. I'm on staff at Drake Campus Fellowship. But I just have to say I'm a Viking at heart. I got connected to Campus Fellowship right away my freshman year at Grandview and got more and more connected as God transformed my heart throughout college. I'm now married to Trey, as I'm sure you've heard many times. And we have a little girl on the way coming in August. We're excited for you to meet her. Tonight, instead of sharing my testimony specifically on how I came to know Christ in light of the conference this week, I'm going to share how God transformed my view of love, sex, and relationships. My hope is to share how my upbringing and experiences shaped my skewed view of relationships, how I pursued relationships in my flesh and how that affected me, and how the Lord has redeemed and is continuing to redeem my view of love, sex, and relationships as I grow to understand the endless depths of the gospel. When I was a baby, my parents got divorced, and actually all my grandparents are also divorced. My parents worked really hard to be cordial with one another, even going to the same church in town, so my brothers and I would go to the same church every weekend. We were a church-going family who had pretty moral values, which is pretty typical for most families in South Dakota. But from a young age, relationships and sex consumed the media around me, from watching shows after dinner to basically every rom-com ever. I wouldn't realize until much later how much that affected my view of sex and relationships. In elementary school, I had my first experience with sexual sin apart from lustful thoughts, which was masturbation, in which I had no idea what I was doing, but I knew it was wrong because of the guilt and shame that I would feel after. It felt good for the time and often would be an escape from worry or anxiety. That didn't last long, and I stopped cold turkey when caught once by my mom. As I moved into middle school, my friends and I were basically all obsessed with boys, which basically is every middle school girl ever. My fantasizing and lustful thoughts in my mind switched from things I'd see on TV or in movies to romanticizing any relationship with a guy, specifically craving their attention. Because of my height and athletic ability, which was this tall, 6th grade, I was surrounded by abundance of male friends and then a handful of girls as my closest friends. Throughout those middle school years, in my flesh, I had a way of making a guy like me, then we would start dating, and would continue until one of us would change our minds. This became a pretty consistent cycle then, and would also happen again in late high school into college. Also during this period of middle school, I started hearing the gospel for the first time through FCA coaches at my school and camps I'd attend in the summer. My freshman year of high school, I started dating a guy who grew up in a solid Christian family. For the first time, there were boundaries and limits placed on a relationship outside of what I decided, which was new and pretty weird to me at first, but also sort of comforting. Of course, my parents had certain rules at our house about guys, but I typically found my way around them very easily. This relationship continued for 2.5 years through high school and ended differently for the first time than any of my other ones. That guy I was dating admitted that he had been struggling with an addiction to pornography for years, and that to honor God and fight sin, we had to break up. This rocked my world more than anything else that ever had at that time. Looking back, this was probably the first time that my relationship idolatry was totally exposed in my heart. I completely found all my worth in whatever relationship I was in. I had an intellectual understanding of the gospel at the time, but I had no idea what to do with this brokenness I was experiencing, so I quickly turned back to this cycle of casually dating guys and to appease my deep desire for love, affection, and attention. Coming into college, I prayed to meet other Christians, played softball, studied hard, and got to know the girls on my floor at Grandview, but spent lots of my weekends at ISU with the guys dating. The first taste of freedom came on quickly, as I didn't have a time to be home or my parents checking in on me, where I was at, what I was doing. This relationship quickly became sexually immoral during my first semester of college. I had been taught growing up that sex outside of marriage was wrong, so we indulged in everything except what I'd call real sex. The guilt and shame I would carry with me for days after burdened me, but since I had no foundation for what sex was, how God designed it, and why it should be only in the covenant of marriage. I had no idea what to do with these feelings, so I buried them. I got connected to Campus Fellowship my first week of school from my RA Gen, and over the semester and year, I continued to get more and more involved. So many older women loved me and shared truths of the gospel with me, but at that time I was holding them at a distance. I became busier with softball, traveling the spring semester, but I did my best to get to Bible study or midweek alive, and when I didn't have games during the week. At one point in the spring, I heard a girl's testimony who had dealt with a lot of the same things I had, and I think it was the first time the Lord convicted me of my sin with the guy I was dating. Through a lot of internal toil and asking my teammates what I should do, who I was spending just so much time with, and also they were like, none of them were Christians, I ended up breaking up with this guy. Wrecked again by my consuming relationship idolatry. Just ask Caleb Thompson. I broke down to him one night after Saturday night church, and I also was now more aware of my sin than ever. I was yet again in a place of immense desire, but the first time trying to seek Christ for forgiveness, grace, and repentance. I would love to say that at this point I grew a ton and had victory over that sin that consumed my heart and mind as a brand new baby Christian. But I would actually say that I learned through even more entanglement with sin in these relationships about the biblical truths on these matters. The summer after my freshman year, I was reading and studying the Bible for the first time on my own, and the gospel became good news to my soul. I yet again started dating another guy, though, at the end of the summer, and was thinking that I was on a better track now, that I knew the gospel, yet I lacked any clarity on what kind of guy I should desire to be pursued by. I thought if he checked the Christian box, then I was like good to go. I tried to pursue purity in the relationship, which lasted about a semester in my own strength and willpower, until I would yet again fall into sexual immorality. At this point, I was learning about what it looked like to start confessing sin to older women and peers around me, but I was unsure of what repentance looked like through the Spirit instead of superficially in my flesh. This battle continued on and off with sexual sin until the end of college. During the spring semester of my junior year, I'd started Set Free with some other ladies at Grandview, where I had a consistent place of accountability, confession, verse memorization, and started to have victory over the thought patterns I'd developed over years and years, and started to have a biblical understanding of singleness, sex, and marriage. 1 Corinthians 10:13 was the verse that I clung to during this time, which says, "No temptation has come upon you except for what is common to humanity. But God is faithful. He will not allow you to be tempted beyond what you are able. But with that temptation, he will also provide a way out so that you may be able to bear it." There was so much power in the grace, faithfulness, and constant call to a higher living with these women around me. Then in March, COVID hit, and I went back to live with my family closer to the guy I was dating. 2 weeks into that, my world fell apart. My stepdad and mom sat me and my two other brothers down for dinner one night to tell us that my stepdad had been having an affair and he was moving out. Due to this, I also found out even more information about the initial divorce between my mom and dad, which basically forced me to process through 2 divorces at the same time during the pandemic when I was stuck at home. This was by far the biggest trial I'd ever come across in my life, and even more so as a Christian. By God's grace, he put right in front of me the real physical consequences of sexual sin that would have lasting effects on my parents, siblings, and I. My eyes were open to how even my own sin will have a lasting impact on me, my future marriage, and even my own kids. I also saw in this my continual need for Jesus and personal sanctification. For the whole rest of that year, as I entered my senior year of college, I wrestled with if I should even marry anyone, if I was dating the right guy, if I was taking my sin seriously enough. Shelby and I would meet every week, and each week she would ask me really hard questions, digging into my relationship, really asking if the guy I was dating would be committed to Christ, committed to the body, to the church, committed to me forever based on his life. I didn't take those questions lightly because of the chaos erupting around me and my family. Finally, during my spring break of my senior year, God brought me to a place of surrender to him in the area of relationships and all my life. I'd been planning to move to Minnesota for chiropractic school, envisioned one day settling down with the guy I was dating and generally just seeking a pretty comfortable life. Instead, throughout spring break and the weeks after, I wrestled through whether or not those decisions would be most honoring to God. And what felt like deciding things on a whim, I broke up with the guy I was dating, applied to go on staff at the Campus Fellowship, and committed to seeking wisdom from God and godly counsel, while also trusting God to provide a future marriage for me if it was His will. I again took Set Free, fresh out of college, and was with different women in the church, single and married, searching so much for clarity on how to find freedom from the sin I'd been struggling with for years, going all the way back to elementary school. I was trying to seek the way God intended relationships to be, working through hard family things, and intentionally trying not to will up a relationship like I always had in the past. I also developed far deeper friendships and relationships with Christian women in my life, diving deeper into these than I ever had before. I fought by the Spirit to be content in singleness, not to seek the attention of men, and regularly confess sin to these women in my life. The following year, Trey pursued me in a far different way than I'd ever experienced before. He carefully and deliberately, while imperfectly, pursued me in dating to pursue marriage. Long story short, we got married 10 months later. In my own marriage, God continues to reveal to me the real glory, which is Christ sacrificing Himself for His bride, the church. I've had to start seeing sex as something good and honoring to the Lord instead of just used for self-satisfaction. God has blessed me with so many older couples and our married couples to speak into my marriage and life, devoted single women who care deeply about me and are willing to tell me hard things, and many young women to share my sin and life with and how God redeemed me by His grace. I want to finish my testimony tonight with just two thoughts. First is, as I've seen throughout my life, both in my family and in my own sin, the area of love, sex, and relationships, when not done well, will completely blow up people's lives. In a room of this size, I'm sure many of you have been impacted by the consequences of sexual sin, whether that was your own or other people's. If you're currently struggling in this area, I plead with you to try to get help from Christian brothers or sisters. Second, even in the midst of sin, my life is a testimony to the grace of God. I don't deserve His favor in this area, but He has blessed me far more than I can ever ask. In a small way, I hope this demonstrates the gospel. We've all sinned against God more than we would ever like to admit, but He, in His grace, not only forgives us, but offers a blessing so rich that we can't even really fully understand it. I stand up here bringing only my sin and brokenness to the table, but God chose me as His bride, washed me clean, and has transformed me into a new creation. Thank you.